Hi, this is Julia. Welcome to the Curved Hexie Sew-Along. I want to start out by showing you how to work the ruler. If you just received the ruler from me, you will notice that it has brown paper on one side. So the first thing you need to do is score with a straight pen, and you can just peel that brown paper right off. Okay, we're ready to go. First, I want to show you how the ruler works. If you will notice, it has markings on it for P's, P1, P2, P3, P4, and then it also has some S's. There's an S1, and then up here there's an S2. The P stands for point. You can line it up either on the P1, the P2, P3, or P4. And I'll be telling you in each step of the way of our hexagon stitch along. Oh, I like that, hexalong. Maybe we ought to call it that. Which marking to line it up on. What we'll be doing is marking the hexagon paper with the ruler and a pen, and we'll cut that with paper scissors and use that for our English paper piecing. So those, you see the P's. Now we're going to go to this S1. You see the S1 right there? We'll rotate the paper so that one of the 2-inch sides of this hexagon paper lines up on that S1. See how that just lines up, and so then that's another way to mark your hexagon paper. Or you can rotate it around for this S2, and there is another marking that we could do. At first glance, it looks like there are 6 different ways to mark a hexagon with the 4 P's and the 2 S's. However, there are really a lot more, because you actually could mark, say, for instance, you could do a side. Well, this is an S2, but then you could also use point, the P1 or P2 or P3 or P4, and mark on maybe opposing points so that you get even more markings. So there's a lot of combinations you could do. And I'll tell you each step of the way on our quilt what we're going to mark, what ruler marking we will use. Alrighty, let's start on our stitch along. What I want to mark on these to start with, for step 1, for clue 1, we are going to use P3. So you're just going to line up the point with the P3. I'm sure you can see what I'm doing here. Now, normally I would just use a pencil for my marking, but right now, just to make it sure it shows real well, I am going to use a marker. Now, that marking is there. We have a nice curve. We're going to cut that with paper scissors. Now, you can mark and cut these one at a time, or you could actually stack a few. See, I'm not even marking this one. If you have to very carefully make sure they're lined up perfectly, because we want them to end up the same. Sorry about my camera. And we'll just cut that. I'm not going to sit here and do it, but you get the point. You cut around that curve very carefully with your paper scissors. Now, what do we do next? We're going to talk about our fabric. Now, as you know, I have chosen to use some Tula Pink, but you can use whatever you want. I like to, and I'm going to give you an example here of some that I've already pinned in place. I just pin my hexagon papers to the back side of the piece of fabric all along. Now make sure I leave a good gap between. I want to trim these at about 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the paper. So here's one that I've already done. This is one of these hexie papers that I have cut using the P3. And you see I have left a pretty generous stitch allowance around there for turning over and basting. Now I like to use a needle base. I don't like to glue, because I just don't like to use any kind of glue and have residue on my fabric. When you have a piece that is curved up and in like this for a curve, I do like to clip it just a bit. You get my scissors, they fell on the floor right as I was starting. So let's see. If you see how I'm clipping this, just a little bit along that curve. You don't have to go all the way in, just enough to help it baste around the edges. And I'm just going to go around, whoops. I'm trying to do it looking in the camera instead of looking at the fabric. That doesn't work very well. Alrighty, now we've clipped that. Now before I start basting, I want to do a little finger pressing. And I'm just going to press that fabric right up against the fabric. Right up against the cardstock of the paper. And that's going to help make our basting job a little bit easier. And it doesn't take but a few seconds. Okay, now let's do around the curve. Here we go. Now, that didn't take long. Okay, I've got a threaded needle. So let's start to baste. I usually have a thimble on one finger, and I don't right now, but we will manage. When I am working with curved hexagons, I do want to get that curve basted pretty quickly. I don't want to leave it for last. I find it's easier to go ahead and get it done. However, I like to do one straight side first. So since I'm right-handed, I stitch counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, you'll be going the opposite way. I'm going to start on this side so that I can do it and then get the curve over with. If you're left-handed, you'll be basting this side first and then going around your curve. So let's just get started. I'm going to show you the way I baste. Of course, your way might be different. I always like to leave the knot on the front side of the quilt. So I'm coming up from that right side through all those layers and leaving my knot there. Now I'm using black thread right now just so it'll show up better for the camera, but I typically use a neutral gray for everything I do, basting and piecing and stitching these together. I want to go around a whole section so you can see. You don't have to take little stitches. We're just trying to get our edges flipped and hold them in place. Now, when we're going to get up to this point, remember this is a pretty severe point, so we want to make sure it is crisp. And I'm just going to use my finger to fold that back. And again, we want to flip that over. Yep, see that's a nice sharp corner, and that's good. And now we're going to get that needle through near that point to make sure that it's held in place. Now we're onto our curve, and you're going to see this is not hard at all. We just like we do any other paper piece, English paper piece basting. We're just going through that edge, and those clips do make this a little bit easier. And here we go. We're going to get another one in. And just go around the edges like that. Now, I did not do any fussy cutting on these first pieces. I'm just trying to get you going on the ruler right at this point. I will probably do some fussy cutting when I'm making this quilt because I'm using that wonderful Tula Pink. I think is it called homemade or handmade? Anyway, it has all the little scissors and the cute little details, so those will be fun to fussy cut. I'm sorry, I keep scooting it away from my camera lens. So here we go. Do you notice we're almost done to that curve? That wasn't so hard. If I could quit catching my thread on it, I would be doing better. Now, okay, we're back to this other point. And again, I want that point to be nice and sharp. I'm just going to fold it over. Now my thread kind of got under there, and that's okay. Let's flip it over and make sure our point looks good. Yep, that looks really good. And we're just going to go up in here to get that point held into place. And now we're on a straight side. And these straight sides are just lickety-split fast. And we're almost around. We just have 2 more sides to go. Even these corners. We want to be nice and sharp, so I always tend to check them just to make sure. I want to make sure I get that little fold stitched down real well, so I'm going to go up and over it. Now, let's finish this side. We have one more side and we'll be ready to learn how to stitch these curved pieces together. I hope you're having a good day today. I just got back from my weekly grocery pickup. No contact. I don't know what I would do without being able to get groceries like that, because with all this COVID-19 going around, I don't want to go in any stores at all, and I don't. I pretty much stay home, or I go to the no contact grocery pickup. Okay, there's our another little point. We are lucky that both of my dogs are sound asleep in the next room, because sometimes they could start barking and drive me up the wall while I'm trying to do something like this. But right now, they're both sound asleep. And we're almost done as I babble away. And now, let's see, this is our last point. We're going to make sure we get that one neatly stitched down. Go through close to that point, close to that edge, and we're done. Now, I'm going to show you how I end off these. I don't like to tie a knot that involves the fabric. I want my knot to sit on top. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, we have come around, there's our knot, and we came all the way around that way. And here's where my thread is coming out now. The way I end off on basting is I go up a couple of these big stitches, and I'm just going to go under the stitch. And you see, I'm not involving the fabric at all. I'm just going under a big stitch. Now I have sort of like an upside down V with my thread. You see what I mean? There's one side of it and there's the other. The way I like to end off here is I go under that thread. That's where my needle actually came up earlier. And then I'm going to go under this thread. And now once I pull that taut, it ties a knot against one of the stitches, but it doesn't involve the fabric. So it'll be really easy for us to clip out that basting thread later. Now you can do it however you want to end off, but that's the way I like to do it. Let's see if I can get that thread clipped. Okay, so now that is all basted, and we are ready to stitch it to the other side. Remember, when we cut this hexagon piece with P3, we had 2 pieces of paper, and I have already basted the other one with this green fabric. Now you will notice that this was one of the curves that goes out. I didn't need to clip the edges. It does kind of gather up. Do you see those little gathers a little bit as you base this one? And that's just what you want, because you got the fabric folded like that, and it'll have a few little gathers. That'll all be fine. Now the way I stitch them together is to do them flat like this. You know, usually you might do things right side together, but you see right sides together, you've got this paper, you've got this severe bending you'll have to do in the paper. That's not going to be good. It's just as easy to do these flat. That much easier. So what I like to do, I'll actually be stitching from the front side, which may surprise you, but I promise these stitches won't show. I'm going to turn it around to the back, and to hold these pieces together, I'm going to use some blue tape, painter's tape. Now, first thing you need to do is, I'm going to take that pin out. I don't need that anymore. Sorry. What we need to do is get them lined up, and you want to make sure that the straight sides are in a straight line coming down. And that way you know you're all lined up. We don't want to get it tilted a bit. Now I'm going to tear my tape over here in the background and have it ready to go. Now see, hold that, just hold them tightly together and make sure that that line is straight. I'm going to shift it just a little bit. And then I'm going to put a piece of tape just right across where these come together. And I'm going to do another one on the other side. You want to make sure that these, you see the little tail we have on this pink one? We're going to put that to the back. We don't want that to show. And again, we're going to pull these closely together and put a little piece of blue tape on the back. And make sure it's pressed down. Now, turn it over and make sure that looks nice and straight. Oh yeah, that looks perfect. Okay, now I'm going to get a more neutral thread to stitch these together. Though the stitches aren't going to show, so it'll be fine. Even if you used a bright thread, but we're going to use a neutral because it really will disappear. Let me show you how I do this. Now, some people might start stitching these together at this end and go to this end. I do it a little bit differently. I want to make sure that there is no tug apart at these ends. I want to make sure it's nice and secure. So I'm going to actually start about 3/8 of an inch from the end, and I'm going to stitch that way all the way to the point and secure it. And then I'm going to keep stitching and come all the way back, secure it here, and then come back in a little bit. And that's going to ensure these pieces are really tightly sewn together. I have a knotted thread again, and I'm going to come up from this back side. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up under that seam allowance that's pressed over, right to the very edge of that pink. And now my knot is actually underneath this piece. And I'm going to just separate this just enough. Do you see how I'm doing this? And just let that needle come through. So our needle will be on the top because we're sewing from the top. Now, hopefully you can see that. Here's where my thread in my hand, I've got it held in place there. There's where the thread comes up from underneath, and it's well knotted. And it's on the pink side. I'm going to rotate this. What we're going to be doing is the ladder stitch. The way you do a ladder stitch is you're going to come right along the edge. I'm kind of on top though, and I'm right along the edge near where that thread came up. And I'm going to take a little small stitch, doesn't have to be too tiny, and I'm just in the green. Do you see that? I'm just stitching along right at the edge on the green. And now I'm going to pull my needle through, and now where that thread comes up, I'm going to do the same thing but on the pink. So I'm going to go down and just right close to the edge I've made a stitch. And that's the ladder stitch. And we go back and forth. We're going to go from the green side to the pink side. There's the green side again. And let's do the pink side. This really goes pretty quickly. I really, really like the ladder stitch. When I used to use the whip stitch to sew hexagons together, even straight sides, I found that over time in my finished quilts, the stitches began to show, and I really don't like my stitches to show. I want them to be hidden, and I feel like the ladder stitch is better at hiding. Now if you see, now I'm on the green and I'm coming out right at the end. Okay, now it looks like these are a little separated, but it's just because the stitches aren't pulled taut. See, I'm going to pull that and everything comes together and you don't see those stitches. Now what I'm going to do, now that I'm in the end, I'm going to take a tiny little stitch. I'm just catching the point right there on the pink fabric. And I'm going to start to pull that. I'm going to leave it with just a little bit. That's our black thread getting caught. Let me show you here. I'm going to leave that little loop here. And I'm going to run my needle through it. And that ties a tiny little knot just right there at the end. And that's going to help secure the ends together. Now I'm just going to start again. I'm going to go all the way to the other side, and it really doesn't matter which I do first, but let's do the pink, and then let's do the green, and I'm just going to do a few more stitches to make sure you know how to do this. Let's get that thread in there. There we go. And you're not going through the paper. You're just right at the very top, just through that top layer of fabric, but close to the edge. So I hope you've seen how you understand this now. We're going to go all the way over here, secure the end with another little loop knot, and then come back a little and end off on the back. I promise you're going to like this ladder stitching technique. It works so well. Now I'm going to finish this one later. I actually just, well, I'll leave the needle hook. I want to show you how this quilt is going to begin to come together. We are going to use actually 6, just like this. So I want you to cut 6 2-inch hexagons just with a P3, and then we're going to put them together just like this. Let me show you. I've got 5 already stitched together, so you're going to get a feel for it. Bring this in. Okay, there are my 5 stitched together. Pull my camera out just a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. Do you see how I did that? If you take one of these and have this green section down with this curve going up, this side, this right side of this bottom section is always going to point to the center. Do you see that? So this side points to the center. And they kind of make a little pinwheel spinning around. Isn't that pretty? I just love the effect these curved hexagons give. So we're going to make a section that looks just like that. I'm going to take a picture of my finished one and put it on the blog. Do you notice something? I haven't done the center one yet. And I'm already sewing these together. And that's okay because we are stitching from the top using the ladder stitch. We can add the center later. It's not a problem using the ladder stitch. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to use for my center. I was going to fussy cut one of the sewing machines in the Tula Pink pattern, the fabric, see these? But they are a tiny bit too big, so I'm not sure. I may end up doing even a curved hexagon for the center. So don't feel like you have to make your center yet. If you want to, go ahead. If you have something you can fussy cut and just do a whole hexagon, while I keep grabbing this and moving it, you can go ahead, but you don't have to. Now the way we stitch these together is the same way. I like to use the ladder stitch and stitch from the top. I like to tape underneath, and I just do my little ladder stitch, and I do that on all of them. It really goes together pretty quickly. I do want to point out one little anomaly that you might notice as you start stitching these along. Let me show you one spot. When I started putting these together, and I did not do a very good job, but beside the point, do you notice that this side of this top one is just a tiny bit longer than this one? You see, it just sticks out just a hair. And I'm going to tell you why that happens. Remember, we cut this into 2. In between here, we have the fold of the fabric. And that tiny bit of fabric on either side makes this side a tiny bit wider than this one. Because see, this one was not cut on this side. Usually, I can ease it in and you'll never know the difference. Like on this one, I did a better job of easing, and see the points hit exactly. If you do have any trouble with this easing in, you can always cut a sliver from the middle of your paper. I don't do that. I prefer just to go with it. But if you, for instance, say you have marked it with a Sharpie, like this, you might cut, if you can cut very carefully, cut on one side of the Sharpie and then cut on the other side of the Sharpie, and you can remove this tiny little bit of paper. You don't have to do that. I don't worry about it. I ease them in place, and it never has caused a problem for me. Alrighty, there you go. That's our first unit for our curved Hexie Stitch Along, and I hope you'll join me, and I hope you'll start posting your photos and let me see your work. Thanks. Bye.